Hello, everyone. Welcome into today's webinar, Mitigating AI Cybersecurity Risks and Threats with Microsoft Security Copilot, presented by our expert technical instructor here at New Horizons, Eric Bland. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating today's session. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you via email after the session. And we always encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Eric.
Great, thanks a lot. Hey, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. We're going to take a quick look at what Microsoft Security Copilot is. There are some hands-on simulations. They don't have the full product available to you. Let's see, can I send this? Yep, there you go. So if you've got the chat open, there's a link to those, and I'll share that link at the end because if somebody joins a little bit later on, they won't see what's in the chat. If it's something's there and then you join, you don't see what's there. So just a little quick information about me. I've been in IT for forever. Started out working the help desk, worked my way up, became an IT manager at a small business. Eventually transitioned over into being a trainer. The first training center I worked for also used their trainers as consultants. So a little bit, get my hand in on things. And then when Microsoft introduced, well, of course, first there was BPOS, the what is essentially Exchange Online, and then a year or so later, Azure. Um, I jumped in early on those, having come from a small business, it was kind of obvious. So you can see there's a bunch of certifications there. Those are required of trainers, but you can earn those certifications. Also, the security certifications, there is a security fundamentals. There's also the security operations analyst, and then there's a security operations architect, are the three main certifications. By the way, the class for the security operations analyst, which is SC 200, includes one module that includes the information that you're seeing today in a little bit more detail. There is also a one-day course that goes into much more detail on this. First thing, just to get things out of the way, what is Copilot? Copilot is an AI based on ChatGPT and Microsoft creating their own individual agent from the ChatGPT idea. But that is a large language model, and it's not like sprinkling pixie dust on everything. It's not going to do everything for you. What it does do, though, is it's helpful in determining what the sentiment of text is. In some cases, it can actually classify pictures. It can summarize text or sometimes pictures. It can easily find similarities, pattern matching. The people who are good at computers tend to be good at pattern matching, and the AIs also are very good at that. But one of the best things it's at is generating new language all out of what would otherwise be technical information. And that's what Microsoft has done is they've taken ChatGPT as a basis and created a bunch of what they term copilots. And the copilots are trained specifically on Microsoft technology or the technology that we're dealing with in particular. So there's a Copilot in your web browser if you're using Edge, which actually has a surprising bunch of capabilities in it. In fact, if you're dealing with Defender XDR or you're dealing with Sentinel and you're struggling with writing KQL queries to investigate information or to write queries to create alerts, even the Copilot that's in the web has been trained on KQL and can actually help you create a decent KQL query, or at least make some suggestions, or take your natural language. Hey, I'm looking for this kind of information. How would I write a KQL query that would look for that information? You can do that even in the web Copilot. There's the Copilot for Microsoft 365. The advantage there is that Copilot has access to your email, to your OneDrive and to the SharePoint sites that you have access to. If you're using Microsoft Dynamics, that Copilot has access to your databases. If you're using Copilot in Azure, now that one currently, the Copilot in Azure is really just a variation of the Copilot on the web. It doesn't have access to your data. It can only see what you're seeing in the current web page. The Azure portal is essentially just a web service. But Security Copilot and GitHub Copilot, like Microsoft 365 Copilot, has access to your data. So if you implement the Security Copilot, it can see everything that you can see in Defender XDR and in Sentinel, and it can search through that information or use that information to help you. If you've got GitHub Copilot, then it has access to all of your code. But it does it in a way that you still have control over it through the regular security tools and compliance tools. So even though Copilot has access to your data, you can audit everything that it does and you can restrict it. In fact, if you are using Copilot, the Copilot is acting as a regular application that is using your permissions to access data. So if I've got somebody who's responsible for a certain department's security, and they're in Defender XDR or they're in Sentinel, and they ask Copilot to go find something, it can only find the information that's available to that particular user. Now, if you've got somebody who's a global administrator or a security administrator, then that means that Copilot would have access to everything, but it is treated as if it were a regular application. Actually, there was something I wanted to mention about the generating new natural language. Something that you might notice if you start playing around with some of the copilots or some of the other AIs that are out there. I was playing around with. We're going to talk about security copilots and pricing coming up here in just a little bit. Chuck, sorry, I just saw that in the chat. We are going to talk about it. Yes, you do have to pay for it, but it's not a license per se. It has a slightly different billing model. One of the things that the Microsoft 365 Copilot does, and actually the Entra, the Copilot that's in Entra that you can just use for free, it has a habit of repeating back to you what you just asked it to do. And if you think about it, that's a really good communication technique. If somebody walks up to you and starts asking you a question or starts giving you instructions to do something, reading back to them what they're asking you is a great way to make sure you both understand what's happening. And the copilots will do that to you. If you ask it to do something, it will basically state your question back to you. And I'll be darned if every time that happens, I don't go, hey, that's a better way to state that. I was kind of sloppy in my question. You cleaned my question up and used more precise language, which is actually kind of interesting to see that happen. And it kind of, it makes you think about creating questions that are stated better, because just like with a human, the better question you ask, the better outcome you're going to get. Now, one thing about AIs in general is you can continue to refine the question so that if you are sloppy when you start, it'll try to figure out what the sentiment is. Where are you going with this question? And actually, in a lot of ways, lead you on to getting the more specific information that you actually need. But having access to all of your data, or the data that you'd normally have available to you, is an extra bonus, because it can use that information to shape the conversation that you're having with it. Yeah, it's not a human, but it does feel like a human conversation. You're having some back and forth with the Copilot. All right. In fact, Microsoft has really been telling everybody, everybody thinks the AIs are some magic that's out there. No, they're just another program, but they're really fast and they've got a lot of data that they've ingested, the large language model, and they're fast at putting that together in more or less real time. But it's still a computer program. Good old garbage in, garbage out still rules what we're doing here. So the better your prompts are, the better the results are that you're going to get out of it. So you're going to see this actually again in this presentation. You need to tell Copilot what your goal is and what you need Copilot to do for you specifically. Um, you should provide a source. Where should it go look for the answers? Add context to it. Now, you can add context in the initial question, but you can also do follow-up prompts to more to focus the answer in the area that you really want. That's also, you hear about hallucinations that that AIs have. They're okay. What they're doing is they're making connections. Typically, the problem you run into with a Copilot in Microsoft's environment is it has access to data that may be out of date. And in fact, that's another thing you need to think about is cleaning up old sources of information so that the AI is not training itself on information that's out of date, because otherwise it might use that information. In fact, we see that if you ask Copilot to do PowerShell or actually like .NET code, and sometimes even KQL, it might give you an answer that was correct a year ago, but there's been a change since then. But it was trained on all of that old information, and so it might use that. So you need to be careful. There is still appropriateness. We still need the humans to double check what the AI is saying you should do. Try and set clear expectations for what you want in the response, and then iterate based on that, to fine tune what you're doing. Again, we're going to come back to that specifically with security. All right, so OpenAI is, of course, the Microsoft's partner in AI, but they are combining OpenAI's models with models that are specifically trained and hosted by Microsoft. But that also means that Microsoft's built-in security and compliance tools do apply to them. When you set up Security Copilot, by default, and it used to be the other way around. The default used to be different, but they've changed it now. By default, Microsoft will review the questions and answers unless you tell them not to. They'll do human review on how you're using Security Copilot, and they will use your Security Copilot to train their general model. But the administrator who sets up Security Copilot in the in the setup pages, you have the option to disable both of those so that your information is not reviewed by Microsoft, by humans at Microsoft, and your data is kept entirely in your tenant and doesn't go anywhere else. Originally, those two were both opted out by default and you had to opt into them. But recently, I've noticed they seem to have changed it to opt in as the default, and you can opt out, and you do need to keep an eye on that. You're dealing with security, so should your information be used by Microsoft in general? Now they anonymize the information, but still, that is a potential information leakage that you need to be aware of. But it is trained specifically on all of the Microsoft information. How does Azure work? How does Microsoft 365 work? How does Sentinel work? How does Defender XDR work? And then specifically on how security professionals are normally analyzing data so that it will be quicker than a general AI would be when it comes to looking at information. So what does it do in particular? Summarizing incidents. How many times have you looked at an alert that was raised that used the generic template that Microsoft had, and you go, I wonder what that really means. But also, if you're looking at an alert and there are other maybe associated alerts, since pattern matching is one of the skills that AIs are particularly good at, not only can you get a summarization of that one alert or incident that was raised, the Security Copilot is also looking at the other alerts and incidents that have been fired around it, looking for there to be a possible connection. So it's not just cleaning up the generic language that Microsoft used that maybe you didn't have a good understanding of. It can also identify where there might be some other relations. Impact analysis. The one of the problems that we always have when something is found, where do I go looking for the damage that was done? Um, Now, you have the threat analysis information from Microsoft, and you can actually import third-party threat information into Sentinel or Defender XDR. But how many times have you imported something and said, I'm going to read that when I have time? But it's not just reading it. You have to keep it in mind when you're looking at incidents. Well, Copilot ingests all of that information and adds it to its knowledge base. It's not forgetting, oh, yeah, I know I read something about that a couple of months ago, or there was some new notices from Microsoft that I hadn't gotten around to reading yet. Copilot's read all of that stuff and integrated it in there. So it has the latest up to date information at its fingertips. And yes, you should still be doing that, but there's just so much information that's out there. Reverse engineering of scripts. Oh, how many times have I looked at a script and gone, oh man, I'm gonna have to sit here and pull this thing apart. It's got loops inside of loops inside of loops, and to figure out what it's doing, because of course a lot of it's been obfuscated. So why not have the AI that's been trained on PowerShell, command line interface, .NET, uh, Python, take a look at the scripts and tell you what's happening in plain English. There's where the language generation comes in. And then helping you, again, putting together the information that it's been able to put together and giving you step-by-step guidance. How many times do you have to go look up security baselines and best practices to find out, okay, I see this happening. What's my next step? Well, the impact analysis, the reverse engineering of scripts, and the summarization, including looking at other related incidents and alerts that have happened, which is something you're going to do, but it's doing it a lot faster. And so you can get to your end result a lot quicker. Again, it does have older information mixed in with the new information, so you always need to double check everything that's happening. Although when you get an AI that's more specifically trained, you tend to have less of that hallucination type of activity going on. Now, Copilot exists in two different forms. Security Copilot does, pardon me, in two different forms. There's the standalone experience. This is a site that you go to where you can put in prompts. And in fact, you can see there's this prompts to try. So they've got some suggestions that you can use. You can store all of the sessions that you have. When you start a session with an AI, then it knows that the previous questions that you asked are part of the context for the answers that it's giving. You can then close a session and start a different session. Sure, it knows about what happened in the earlier session, but it's not using that to shape the context. That way, you can go from, I was dealing with something in Azure, now I'm dealing with something entirely different in Microsoft 365. You've created a new context that the AI is going to use as a frame of reference. But you can come back to those sessions later on. Maybe you've thought of something new or different, or maybe there's some new information that changes the way, and you can actually rerun those sessions and put the AI back into the same context. Or what you might discover is you went through a series of questions that you could have done a little bit better and a little bit quicker. You can clean them up and then actually create prompt books. A prompt book is a series of questions that should be asked in a particular situation to have the AI help you in a very specific way. And you can share those prompt books with other security professionals, even in general, but within your own organization. And Microsoft has some prompt books that they've released. So, they have suggested prompts, but that's just a single question that's being answered. Sometimes you need to start with one question to set the context and then have follow-up questions where you're focusing in on, depending on what the answer from the first one was. And that's where the Promptbook Library can come in. You can save those. And in fact, you can use sessions to actually create a new prompt book that you store for later on. I know I asked it these series of questions earlier and it came out really well. Well, you can save that here and then reuse it and share it with other people. There's the prompts to try that we looked at a little while ago. You can also create agents. They're macros. Let's call a spade a spade. It's a macro, is what it is. So if there's something that you need to have automated or at least semi-automated, then you can create an agent. There's Copilot Studio in Azure. You can use the Azure AI API to create your own agents. That way, you're getting customization that really for your organization. Microsoft creates features and services that can apply to everybody in general. You may have something more specific in mind for your environment beyond just prompts and prompt books that you have. There are plugins from Microsoft, plugins from third parties, Splunk, ServiceNow, CrowdSec, Gray Noise. Just as a for instance, you can plug in from a website since the copilots can actually look at what's going on a web page. You could actually have a plugin that goes out to a website, some of the security sites, the open source security sites out there. If there's not a specific plugin for them, you can at least raid the information off of their web pages. And then you can build your own custom plugins using Copilot Studio, OpenAI's API. An example, Security Copilot has plugins for Sentinel, for Defender XDR. The Defender XDR capabilities, file analyzing, incident reports, guided responses, listing incidents and related alerts. Again, saves you the time of creating a query and grabbing them all. You can say, hey, show me the alerts that are related to this incident that I'm looking at. And then which you can do all of these things yourself, but the Copilot can do it a lot faster. Summarize the security state of a device. Give me an opinion. How many times, somebody said, hey, are we in good shape or not? And again, based on security best practices and Microsoft security baselines that it's already been trained on, it can look at it. So it's like having the secure score done instantly on a single computer if you're used to messing with the secure score. There's a help down at the bottom, which has links to the documentation, links to the training, which some of this is, or you can open up a support request to Microsoft. Now, this is a relatively new feature within your tenant, which is an isolated, your information is stored within your tenant in Azure. It could include your Microsoft 365 and your Azure and all of your security, or you might have multiple tenants in some cases. But you might need to have different people working with different areas of your information. You can create workspaces so that you can have teams that are working in certain areas that are isolated or at least somewhat isolated from each other. In particular, if you've got multiple geographic locations where there are significant security and compliance laws that you have to deal with. So you might have a workspace for the EU and a separate workspace for North America, for instance. And that way you can have plugins, prompt books, and files. I kind of skipped over that one. You can also upload files to train your Copilot on with your specific information. That it can use in trying to correlate alerts and incidents. Um, Copilot also exists on some, but not all of the pages, for instance, in Defender, in Intune, in Purview. And so if you keep an eye out for the Security Copilot button, and what it does is it uses the current page that you're on to give you information. So Security Copilot is accessible in Defender XDR, Entra, Purview, and they're expanding that, and that gives you pretty much automatic actions that kick off immediately based on where you are, as opposed to the standalone experience where you're starting basically looking at your entire organization and then narrowing it down through your prompts. Here, it can see what you're looking at and it will give you, summarization. So summarizing incidents, and then offering guided response to the incident. So you can see here, they're looking at, well, in fact, let me see if I have this up here. Here we go. So here's one of the simulations. And what I've got is Defender XDR gone into incidents. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this first incident here. And you can see they've got information about the incident. We got the incident graph here. Um, and then, yeah, it looks like this incident's ready for reporting. Generate an incident report here. And you can see here's Copilot has created an incident summary. And then here, oh, okay. Now, in the simulations, unfortunately, they haven't programmed in everything. But what I could see there were the prompts that were used to create this incident summary. Maybe you need to tweak them a little bit instead of using the generic one. That's the embedded experience is Microsoft giving you generic prompt books, in effect, that act automatically. And then you can see it's got triage and some response that's happened down here. So you can actually take a look at some of these, although with limits on them. Script analysis, natural language to KQL. How many times have you had to go look up some KQL command to make sure you know how it works correctly? Incident reports, analyze files, device summary, and identity summaries. How quick, you can see a device that was impacted by an incident. Hey, Copilot, what's the general security standing of that user or that device, rather than make you go look at it. Again, everything that it's doing here, you could do yourself, but it's doing it pretty much instantaneously. Now, I say that you will see there is some delay as things get thought through, but the embedded experience is optimized so that pretty much it shows up by the time you open up the windows. So up to 100 alerts can be summarized in a single incident summary. So there are some limits on there. And then depending on the availability of data, it might include time and date, entity or assets, a summary of the timelines, assets involved in the attack, indicators of compromise, and then names of the threat actors. Okay, now here's where the Copilot can actually be a little bit of an extra help. Your incident was generated by a query of some sort. Your query determined what data was available, but Copilot has access to all of your data. So it actually could, in effect, tweak the query that was used, not directly. It's not, I mean, you actually can use it for that. But when you're looking at the incident, it can have visibility to some additional information beyond what your query collected. If your query didn't collect everything, maybe that was necessary. And you might want to tweak that, and it might actually suggest that you tweak it a little bit. There's the triage that we were looking at in that simulation. Things that you can do to, stop the bleeding, if you will, containment, investigation, and then ultimately remediation steps that are going to be suggested. There's the analyzing scripts and codes, generating KQ, find alerts about the unusual login activity. Now, see, there's where the language processing comes in. That's just a generic prompt, but it knows the context of where you are. If you're looking at an incident and that incident says there was unusual login activity, that's the unusual login activity. You don't have to go in and specify that specifically. It knows what the context is. And then use that to create a KQL query that you can run directly here or add it to the editor and then fine tune it yourself. Again, it's not perfect. It relies on humans to actually complete the thought, if you will. There's the incident reports, analyzing files, and then summarizing devices here. All right, so some of the terminology, a session is a particular conversation. I love the way they say that. A prompt is a specific statement or question. You can make statements to Copilot to kind of egg it along in what it's doing. Plugin are the capabilities for a particular resource, like Intune, for instance, or Defender XDR. Workspace, separate Copilot work environments to help isolate your different security professionals, agents, macros, orchestrator used to compose the skills together. So this just goes into how how it processes what you ask it, and then of course gives you ultimately a response. Here's another look at doing effective prompts. Make sure you have a goal in mind. Make sure you set the context, even though it can see what you can see on the screen, because it has access to all of your back-end information. Setting the context is important. What are your expectations? Give me information about a particular incident for a report that I can submit to my manager, which Security Copilot knows may mean somebody who is not as technically adept as you are. Um, oh, let me give you here before you take off here. Here's a bunch of links for classes and the oh shoot, I gotta get it. There you go. And also, Microsoft has their own self-study information, including those simulations. There's a lot of simulations there. I was just looking at one of them. All right. So how do you pay for Copilot? Now you can set this up either in Azure or when you launch Copilot for the very first time, the Copilot Admin Center, you can provision Copilot capacity there, and it's recommended that you do it there. All right. What you do is you are paying for the Linux servers that are actually hosting your Copilot. This is how Microsoft can keep your information separate from everything else. To use Copilot, you have to have one a compute unit that's running all the time. You can add overage capacity that can be called on if needed. If you have an attack and you've got a bunch of people asking Copilot questions all at the same time, it's going to slow Copilot down if it's only running on one set of servers. So you can have overage capacity. So what you end up doing is figuring out how much do you need running all the time for the normal flow of questions that are coming in. And then if there's an emergency, what you're doing here is you're setting what the maximum amount that you're willing to spend. But like everything else in Azure, you're being billed by the minute for the overage. For the computes per hour that you're dedicating to, you're going to get billed for that 24/7, but your overage is billed only for the minutes that you need it, that you invoke it. There's going to be a little bit of a delay as they get loaded up when you start asking it questions. And then, of course, it's going to unload after it's no longer needed. It's auto scaling is what you're doing there. So how many is my base number that's running all the time that I'm going to pay for all the time? And of course, this is a screenshot. I need to blot out that cost there because that may not necessarily be accurate. And of course, you may have enterprise agreements with Microsoft. But then the overage, this is how far can I scale up? And if I'm going from 1 to 2, obviously you're going to double the cost, but it's only per hour cost, but it's billed by the minute. So if you only use 2 for a couple of minutes, then that's going to create very little extra cost. But it's not a licensed feature. It's a billable resource inside of Azure, billed consistently for the number that you set here with the option to auto scale to additional that are billed by the minute. Again, you can do it through the portal or you can do it with the Copilot page. And that has to be done before you can use it all together. Setting up the environment has to be done by a global administrator or a security administrator. How many security compute units do you want? How many do you want for the overflow? What the geographic location of the tenant? That's going to determine where the data is. With the workspaces, you can have workspaces in different geolocations, similar to the multi-geo licensing that Microsoft 365 has. And then you have the opt-in of the data sharing or the review by Microsoft. And then opt-in or out of logging audit data to Purview, which would expose some of your security information to your compliance people. But again, that lets you track what's happening. And then who can add plugins, who can upload files are some of the other options that you have available in here. There you go. Who can add and manage their own custom plugins, who can add and manage custom plugins for everyone. And then allow Security Copilot to access data from your Microsoft 365 services. You can isolate that also. You add people as either owners or contributor in Copilot. The owner can change the settings. The contributor can add whatever the owner says they can add plugins and documents, for instance. Of course, you have the global administrator role and the security administrator role. All right, so what we did today is like a real short contraction of the SC 5006 Enhanced Security Operations using Security Copilot. It's a one-day class where we actually take the time and do the simulations so that you can see how these things actually work. You can do them on your own by going to the learning path, and that learning path includes all of these simulations, which is that hands-on simulations link that I put in there. This 1 day course is compressed down into about an hour and a half and is a module in SC 200, the Security Operations Analyst. There's also, if you're also dealing with Intune, there's a learning path where they talk about using Security Copilot specifically with Intune. So far, this hasn't been integrated into the MD 102 class, but I would expect that's coming. The MD 102 class is basically the Intune class that's there. But this is available for you to do on your own, or you could bring this up in the Intune class if you're taking MD 102. And then, of course, just the simulations, which are actually the last chapter of this learning path. I'm sorry, ran over a few minutes there. Are there any other questions? Did I catch all the questions that were in there? I think.
Hey, Eric. Yeah, I believe you caught them. I know you kind of went over the security license info, and I believe, yeah, we had a question about the recording, which we'll send after the webinar. But I believe that will be it for us today. I did drop some helpful links, and
Thanks.
of course, Eric dropped a amazing plethora of information too. So if you want to check any of those links out, go right ahead. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Copilot, you can go ahead and visit us at newhorizons.com. But I believe that'll be it for us for today. And we have a lot of great webinars, a lot of thank you so much for the info. So thank you, Eric, for all your expertise as always. And thank you to our amazing audience for joining us today.
Thank you. Hope to see you in class.
Absolutely. We'll see you all very soon, hopefully in the classroom. But if not, we will talk to you soon and have a great rest of your week. All right. Bye for now, everyone.